This is the new diocesan offices, which were opened in November in 2009. The offices have been designed so that we can be a really efficient church for the Anglican Diocese of Newcastle. This is the workplace of the diocesan office, where much of the administration of the diocese is undertaken, and it is about the work of ministry. As I've said to you earlier in previous studies, the work of ministry is to the church, and much of it comes from this office to the church. It's within the church, and it's from the church. Now we're going in this final study to think about the continuity of ministry. For ministry is really a New Testament construct. It's developed there in the practice of St. Paul. I alluded earlier to what St. Paul did when he came to a place like Corinth, for example. He sought out a sympathetic audience, preached the gospel, had respondents to the gospel, formed them into a community, established them, worked with them, lived with them, and then after a period of time, perhaps 18 months, left and went somewhere else. He kept in contact with them through his apostolic delegates, Silas, Titus, Timothy, and wrote to them. And we know, for example, with that tumultuous church in Corinth, that he wrote at least 4 letters, of which we have 2 in the New Testament. And of course, they wrote back to him, often complaining about one another, how things have changed in the church. So ministry is a New Testament construct and practice, and it's been developed throughout the centuries, always influenced by what was going on in history, so that now we have a period of time where the church has to reevaluate how it's to continue ministry to be fulfilling the task and practice that Jesus gave to it. One of the key people who have helped us understand this was a man called Roland Allen. Roland Allen was a missionary in China at the turn of the last century. He was a high churchman, and he went there as a missionary, and as he observed what was happening, he noticed that those who had become converts to Christianity amongst the Chinese were themselves the most fruitful converters of others, whereas the professional missionaries were often people who weren't as effective, and yet they had complete control of the local church. On his return to England after ill health, Roland Allen wrote a series of books, the most influential of which is called Missionary Methods, St. Paul's or Ours. He didn't have very much effect in his own time, but he was rediscovered in about the 1980s by one of the bishops in the United States, Bishop Wesley Frensdorf, the Bishop of Nevada. Bishop Wesley Frensdorf was a dynamic, really charismatic figure in the life of the American church. And he, with the bishops in other remote dioceses like the Bishop of Alaska, eventually drew together a whole group of people in a conference in Hawaii in 1983. It was called the Pacific Rim Conference, and it sought to understand in the present context the principles of being a missionary church that Roland Allen had introduced. Some dioceses from Australia were represented, and you could go as a bishop, a priest, or a layperson from a diocese. 4 of those dioceses from Australia went to Hawaii: the Diocese of North Queensland, Northwest Australia, the Northern Territory, and Rockhampton. It was one of the most fertile experiences that the Australian Church had, for when those bishops, priests, and lay people came back to Australia, they were really on fire with the principles that Roland Allen had developed. And it was recognised that there needed to be change in how ministry was being exercised, especially in remote and regional Australia. The continuity of mission and ministry came from people appreciating the significance of baptism, that baptism authorised those who were baptised to undertake ministry. And so there was a reinvigoration of the baptismal covenant. The liturgies that have been developed in a prayer book for Australia, for example, have reflected this rediscovery of the significance of baptism. And the practice of baptism has been taken far more seriously since the 1980s in our own church. Well, of course, the continuity of ministry is represented in the figure of the bishop. I'm the 12th Bishop of Newcastle, and each time I go to the cathedral, I can see in the apse behind the high altar my predecessors. And whenever a bishop is consecrated or made a bishop, he is always, or she is always, consecrated by 3 other bishops at least. I was consecrated in St George's Cathedral in Perth in 1992, and there were 15 bishops who gathered to help in the consecration service. The point is that ministry is being handed on. There's a continuity of ministry, and it's assured through what's known as apostolic succession. So here I am, the 12th Bishop of Newcastle, consecrated by bishops in all sorts of lines, going back ages and ages. And the point is that I don't invent ministry. None of us do that. Ministry is a given. It's a commandment that's come from the Lord Jesus Christ himself. And this ministry is not just for ourselves. We're not into a selfish spirituality. The ministry that we hold is for other people. And so it's for the not yet members. And I think one of the great books of the Old Testament, the book of Jonah, really teaches us that we can't be possessive about ministry and mission and our knowledge of God. We really actually have to give it over to others. And sometimes it might be in contexts which don't particularly suit us. And the story of Jonah is really an extraordinary story of someone who tried to run away and evade responsibility, and yet in the end was found out. So here we are, the work of ministry, belonging to all the people of God, the faithful baptized, in particular contexts of ministry, with the content of ministry that derives from the Lord Jesus Christ and his ministry, with a sense of the covenant of ministry that's given to us in our baptism, and we now being continuous in that ministry. One of the great tasks ahead of the diocese is to find 2nd and 3rd generations of ministers, lay ministers in our ministry teams, ordained local ministers, stipendiary ministers as deacons and priests, who will really continue the missionary mandate given to the Church. The purpose of ministry is constant. The practice of ministry is contextual. The motive of ministry is contiguous with the servant Jesus. And the psychology of ministry is that we must be commending Jesus to others. I hope that you found these series of studies on the work of ministry in that great letter of Ephesians chapter 4 verse 11 really significant for you. I hope that you've been able to mine some of the significant insights that are contained within the New Testament and within our own development of ministry and practice in the diocese. And I hope that as we move into being ministering communities and mission, we'll be able to share really the great joy of the gospel with others. There are some amazing things happening in the diocese at the present time because of the mission imperative that's attached to ministering communities and mission. I think really of the parish of Murrurundi, which has undertaken some very significant community outreach by people who live within their communities and who have been able to continue the presence of Jesus Christ in those communities. This is really the extension of the incarnation, which is the Church's great purpose. Well, may God bless you as you continue to explore and undertake the work of ministry.